So besides being good friends with Walter, I run a tech startup. I've taken stuff apart all my life. For the first 12, 13 years, it never actually came back together in one piece, and then it started to, which my mom was pretty happy about. And I've programmed and messed with stuff and made art and lots of other things that are entirely appropriate for the son of a research psychologist and an artist to do. I'm also 172 centimeters tall, I weigh 70 kilos, and of course, that made me passionate for contact sports, right? I grew up in America. That meant football and wrestling and lacrosse and all kinds of other things. Now, if you're 172 centimeters tall and you weigh 70 kilos and you're getting knocked to the ground 2, 3, 4 times a minute or so, for the first part, it makes your mother not come to your games. But for the second part, it makes you pretty good at finding ways around things. And so what I'm going to talk a little bit about today is an interesting personal journey I've had into the world of soccer, which is a very European phenomenon. But when you're raising kids in Europe, it's pretty necessary. So I'm going to start off by talking about Daniel. Daniel's in the other room hacking around at computers. Daniel's natural state, if you look at kids, they probably have a natural state where they fall into if you don't touch them and mess around. Daniel's natural state is probably this, with a dragonfly on his finger or poking a cuttlefish somewhere on a beach. Daniel's glasses are usually halfway down his face. His pants are on backwards when he goes to school, and he's incredibly curious about the world around him. Daniel has a little brother whose name is Jacob. Jacob's natural state is this. Since Jacob could walk, there was a ball at his feet. Now, it doesn't come from my side of the family, obviously. But Jacob loves balls. Kicking them, hitting them, catching them, throwing them. And for some reason, football became his big passion in life. He has it in his body. It's amazing to see. When he runs, his feet hit the right way. The stride is there. The movements are there. It's completely natural to him. Now, having a big brother like Daniel is challenging in the academic environment, right, for a guy like this. And for Daniel, having a little brother who can beat him at football is also an incredibly challenging thing. So being a good big brother, Daniel says to me about 2.5 years ago, "Dad, I really want to learn how to play football." And so Daniel and I embark on a little bit of a journey because I know nothing about football. And Daniel can't play football. But Daniel has one really important component to being great at sports, and I think great at life, and that is a ridiculous amount of drive. And he has another key component, and that's something that we, North Americans at least, I think, Canadians don't understand what I'm saying, called chutzpah, which is a great old Yiddish word for basically getting out there and doing things that you have no business doing, right? So not only does Daniel say, "I want to play football," so we find Daniel a great football team. There he is down in the front row there. I decide that I'm going to coach, right? Of course I'm going to coach football, soccer. I've never played a game of organized soccer in my entire life. Right? Balls really aren't my thing. But Daniel wants to do this, and my sense is that if Daniel wants to do this and Daniel's going to be successful, he's going to need my help. And I want to be there to maybe give him a little bit of what I know about finding ways around when you're not amazing at something naturally and building towards success. So Daniel's crew is also a bunch of misfits. Jacob plays in the big developmental team in Stockholm. So if you're a kick-ass soccer player and you try out and you get in there with all the other kick-ass kids and they win their games 13-0, 14-0, 15-0, Daniel's team, not so much, right? These are kids that, when we started playing 2.5, 3 years ago, halfway through the game would find a frog on the edge of the field and be over there while the other team's scoring, right? Now, a group like that is really interesting to work with, right? What do? How do you approach this? And how do you approach it as a hacker, right? How do you find a way around? Finding a way around is interesting. This is a picture of me. I'm number 2 over there in the corner, head shorter than everybody else. I'm 16 years old. I'm playing on the Swedish national lacrosse team. Now, for anybody that's impressed with me playing on the Swedish national lacrosse team, I can tell you that the selection process for the Swedish national lacrosse team is this. There were 60 people playing lacrosse in the country of Sweden. We all met, and somebody said, hey, who can go to England in 3 weeks and play in the European Championships? And the 22 of us who put up our hands, we went and played in the European Championships. Right? I know a fair bit about sports like this. I know a fair bit about sports. But if I'm going to help Daniel out, I need to find a way to approach a completely new sport. Now, there's one approach that in my professional life I absolutely hate, but in this particular context seemed like a pretty good idea, and that's the Mckinsey Approach, which means basically knowing nothing about something, reading lots of books about it, and then telling people what to do, right? So naturally, this is what I do. Now, the hacker approach to this, of course, is to go find the people who know what they're doing, right? The world now is a fantastic place. I've got YouTube, right? So I watch every highlight reel of every game of the best possible players out there. I look at what do Jose Mourinho, well, first of all, need to know who that guy is. I learn the names of the coaches. I learn their coaching strategies. I learn what's what in the game of soccer. What's the context? What are the rules here, right? When I was 15 years old, I loved to write. I still love to write. But back then, I got into this very teenage period of writing poetry. Trite, wonderful love poems to girls who, at that point, were the center of my life, and I can barely remember today. But what I found interesting was that writing free verse poetry wasn't really as much fun as writing in iambic pentameter or haiku or whatever, what have you, where there's structure, because there's structure and rules, and you have to find your ways within those rules to make the poem your own, right? And the world of soccer and the world of sport in general is very much like that. It's an incredibly structured environment. So my brain's not really wired for structure. Daniel's brain definitely isn't wired for structure. And the guys who he's with are modern Swedish children who are not wired for structure. They're definitely not wired for a traditional environment, but these are the rules. There are rules in our lives in general, and there are rules on the football pitch. So I learned those rules, because if you know those rules, then you know the ways around them. And I watch the highlight reels. And I do all of this. And after that, I kind of synthesize it and pull it together into a series of kind of key learnings here. Because I got a bunch of kids who can't play soccer. I can't play soccer, for God's sake. So I can't make it too complicated. So I pulled it down into into kind of 3 main points. One is all ball all the time. And that means that we never run without the ball. Whenever these kids are around me, there's a ball at their feet. Because these aren't Jacobs for whom a ball is a natural state. These are kids who need to spend as much time as possible with the object that they're playing with. Now, what's interesting is at this point in my kind of research work, I start drawing parallels to the rest of my life and to my life as a CEO of a startup, into my own challenges at work, is that really I'm looking at teaching children to spend as much time on task as possible with the one key thing that's going to make them achieve here. And in this case, it's having the ball at their feet. This is a team sport. These are team efforts. We're talking about building teams at schools. The thing with teams is, though, if you don't have individual basic skills, there's very poor potential to participating in a team and making a team work. So the second kind of key thing I took out of all this research work was, let's develop individual skills first, and then we can focus on the team. So the first season was a catastrophe, because they spent all their time dribbling around and looking down at the ball, and very little time looking at each other. But what was interesting is when we started progressing them up to the second season, all of a sudden they're operating at a team, and they trust the fact that the ball's going to stay at their feet. The third thing we picked up in the research work was that if the kids don't progress and don't feel like they're progressing, they very quickly lose motivation. So there's actually a lot of thinking around this in the world of sport and in the world of practicing sport. one practice on a Tuesday looks very much like the practice on Thursday, which looks very much like the practice the next Tuesday. And there's a pretty good reason for that. And it's not just to drill things into the kids' heads, but it's actually that between Tuesday and Thursday and Tuesday and Thursday and Tuesday and Thursday, the kids progress and they get better at what they're doing. And we incrementally increase the load on them and push them a little bit each practice, but if we change things up on them too much, they don't feel like they're getting better. And so these are the kind of the three things we took out of the research phase. Being good McKinsey, Anderson Consulting types, we then develop a set of models, of course, around this once we put it into practice. Now, what does a model look like in this? Well, we keep it simple, right? So it really got me thinking about the different challenges I had with a group of 13, at that point 7-year-olds, then 8-year-olds, and 9-year-olds. I have some kids who have a tremendous amount of ability and a tremendous amount of drive. That's really not a huge challenge as a leader. Very basic stuff around motivating and giving them challenges. But what do you do with the kids that have a tremendous amount of drive and very little ability, like my son? Also really not that big of a problem. That just practice, 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 right? That's just increasing ability. The biggest challenge when I got out there, and half of my team was kind of in that quadrant, right? So they're down in at the intersection, and we're just trying to push them up to the ability and drive piece. But what do you do with the kids on the left-hand side with lots of ability and very little drive? And that's hard, because you see these kids 2-3 times a week for an hour or two at a time, and you've got to get them to understand that that talent that they've got, the fact that they can move the ball with their feet, doesn't help them on the field if they don't have the drive. And I remember one of the first games we played, we were losing 3-1 at halftime. And one of the kids comes up to me and he looks at me and says, "We're going to lose." And this is the kid who is the most talented player on the field. We're going to lose. And we lost. Badly. And that put something in my head, is that if I'm going to get this kid to believe that working hard is going to get him somewhere, and if I'm going to get him up into that quadrant, I'm going to have to show him that there's a correlation between his work, his drive, pairing that with his ability, and making the whole team successful. Now, that's hard to engineer in a work environment. It's hard to engineer for us. In our world, though, it's doable if you take a little bit of a hacking approach. So I scouted out a bunch of teams in the neighborhood, and I figured out who was just slightly better than us. Not a lot better, slightly better than us. And I invited them to play a month later. And I told my guys that we've got a month to prepare for this game. And if we work really hard, we could probably beat these guys. And so we do. We practice, and we practice, and we practice. In that game, we're losing at halftime 3-2. And the same kid looks at me and he says, "No." And I said, "Coach, call me coach. I like being coach." He says, "No, we're going to lose." And I sit down, I do the very coachy thing of getting down on one knee, and I look him in the eye and I say, "You know what? If we really work, we can probably get this one." And we won 5-4. I never heard that kid say that again. And it was amazing to see how his work ethic changed pretty much overnight. Because what he was doing was kind of just moving over, understanding that he had the ability, and if he just pushed a little harder, he would be successful. But I can't tell him that. That doesn't work. The world of sport, though, gives us a fantastic microcosm for teaching these kids these things, if we engineer it. The hacker approach is to use the tools that we have on hand as well. Now, when I was growing up, my coach usually had this as his main tool, right? This is the motivational approach of generations of coaches, generations of teachers and parents as well, right? Everybody in this room doesn't subscribe to this method of working. We don't have to talk so much about this. Now, one of the things I learned from all this research work and from getting on the field was that yelling actually works. And the question is what you yell and how you yell and what you say and how you say it. So in the rest of my life, I've got about an 80-20 rule, right? generally things kind of work out to 80-20. And yelling apparently works out to 80-20 too. If you yell supportive things 80% of the time and tell kids loudly how fantastic they're doing and be very specific in that, then they'll listen to 20% of the time you try to motivate them to actually do things that push them. Right? You also pair it then with them listening to things that I don't, like, I'm not a great soccer player. So if I try to get on the field and teach a kid how to dribble, he's going to laugh at me because I'm going to fall on my face. Right? The world of today, though, gives us fantastic tools. So this is Leo Messi. Leo Messi is 23 years old and broadly considered to be the greatest football player now living, probably ever. Now, the wonderful thing is YouTube can teach a kid how to dribble. All right, so I pick up my iPad, I bring it to practice, and we talk about a drill, and I show Leo Messi doing the drill. You want to see a bunch of kids, kind of get in line with balls at their feet, completely motivated? You show them a video of Leo Messi, rather than me. And this is optimizing, right? I go to a personal trainer when I work out. The reason I go to a personal trainer when I work out is that I need to optimize every minute of my time when I'm in that environment. Because if I do it on my own, I'm not even a quarter as effective. Same thing goes here. I got these kids 2 hours a week. Now, who should teach them, Leo Messi or me? Leo Messi should. And I pull out screens. Kids are phenomenal. It's really interesting. I pull out a coach's pad the first couple of games, and I start drawing X's and O's the way my coaches did. One kid's picking his nose over in one corner. The other kid's looking down at his feet. Somebody else is still chasing that frog. Next game, I pull out an iPad. I have then 12 kids staring at me in rapture. And I've got a big smile on my face, and they're actually listening. So I bring this as a coaching tool, and it changes the entire dynamic of the way my team works. Because all of a sudden, the kids are listening. And they come in, and they start pushing the things around. They start coming with ideas, saying, hey, what if we set up this way? What if I move that way? And they interact, and they're all around this screen. And there's something of a anti-screen movement, at least in Sweden. Whereas if the kids are out playing soccer, they're out there in the fresh air, there shouldn't be any screens involved, right? It's exactly the opposite. You put a screen in that environment, and they're bringing their kind of appetite for learning and interaction out into a very different setting. And it works. It works incredibly well, because all of a sudden we're out in the field executing strategy. And in their heads, for some reason, those little red dots that move around on the screen, they can put themselves in that place in a way that they can't on paper. It's weird. I can't really explain it, but it works. Now, it's been an interesting couple of years. We've taken a team that lost every game we played for the first 6 months to being third in the league. We've done it in a way that is really based on understanding these kids, understanding where they are in these grids, using the best possible tools we've got out there, and pushing them. It's in an environment that's incredibly structured, a difficult environment that isn't, a fantastic, open-ended learning, cloud, but a field, a game that lasts, in their world, 40 minutes, where there's a clear winner and a loser at the end. And so you're taking kids that are used to and working in a Swedish fluffy cloud environment, putting them into a pretty hardcore place for them. And as a kind of personal journey for me, it's been really interesting because I hack stuff and don't like rules. And so how do you get kids who don't like rules to play and perform and be effective? And I think the key kind of across the board has been very clearly showing my guys the connection between work and success, and how working hard, working day in and day out, makes them successful at something that they might not otherwise be. I think this, for me, is really important because I'm bad at this. Probably a lot of you are too. I'm really good at working really hard at things I'm great at. And the hours disappear, and they feel like minutes. But what about the stuff that's not like that? And unfortunately, life still is like that. So when Daniel looked at me and said, Dad, I'm a pretty good soccer player. I said, Dan, you're a really good soccer player. why are you such a good soccer player now after 3 years? And Dad, it's because I work really hard. And I think that lesson for him is incredibly important, because I'm not worried about his creativity. I'm not worried about him grabbing the world by the horns and hacking it around and turning it into things, but I'm worried about, probably because I'm worried about myself, but how do you get kids to really work? Because if they're going to excel, they're going to have to. It's been cool. Now I'm worried, though, because this is my third. And it'll be really interesting to see what taking 12, 8-year-old girls is going to do to this whole idea. Thank you very much.